Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another restful night of true paranormal stories to help you fall asleep. For this episode, I wanted to try telling paranormal stories around the campfire. Please let me know in the comments down below if you like it, or if you want me to go back to a black screen and rain sounds. Also, please remember that there is only one ad spot in this video, right after the intro, so that your sleep does not get interrupted. And without further ado, lay back, relax, and enjoy these true paranormal stories. My grandfather died in 1995 due to emphysema and other health conditions. He was in his early 60s and left us prematurely as he had many people who loved and depended on him, including many young grandchildren. I was only 4 years old, almost 5 at the time when he passed, and I don't remember much from this darker time in life, but I remember his funeral extremely vividly. I was in a funeral home that has multiple parlors and many hallways throughout the building. I remember being outside of his parlor and seeing him across the room. We locked eyes. I walked over to him. After all, he was my grandpa. I did not realize at the time that he had passed on. We began our usual, as we were two peas in a pod and had a special relationship. We held hands and walked through the halls. Much of the conversation I do not recall, but I do remember showing him the lounge area, as that was my favorite place to be, what with the snacks and vending machines. As we approached the area that we had met at, we stopped. And he said to me, "Michael, I have to go now." And then he vanished, literally leaving my hand empty in the air. I can still see my empty hand and remember the shock and confusion. The part that helps me to think this was an authentic experience, and this is something my grandmother, aunt, and mother remember well, and were concerned for years about. As I approached the open casket, my mother picked me up, and I saw my Grandpa Leroy there, in his piece, and I began, confused, to relentlessly ask why Grandpa was in a casket, and what was wrong with him. My mother told me crying, and I remember this clearly. "Michael, honey, he's dead. He's gone and not coming back." I was in disbelief, arguing. No, I just saw him. He's outside." After this, I remember us all crying together, but that's all. I never spoke about it until I was about 12 or 13 years old. I was at my grandmother's, and her health was wavering at the time. I had been thinking about a lot with her being in that state and having memories of my experience, and I finally broke down and told them what I had remembered. Again, we cried, and they didn't believe that I could remember that, or that I had held on to it all those years of childhood. They, in a way, directly corroborate my experience for me, at least solidifying in my head as a final goodbye from one of my favorite human beings, as they remember the scene at the casket. They were always too afraid to ask me about it, maybe to protect me from emotional anguish. My grandmother, for the remaining year or so that she was with us, would ask me to tell her the story anytime that I would visit her. She also claims to have woken up one day, feeling my grandfather lying next to her. She said she could feel it was him, as if she went to bed next to him and woke up together. She never told anyone that until I had shared my story. I hope anyone reading this enjoyed. It's a story that I'll never forget. This is the first time that I'm actually writing about this. When I was 13, my older brother and I were on our way to a movie when we were hit by a drunk driver. I woke up in a hospital 4 days later, having lost my right leg and the other in a cast, along with other injuries. That night, I woke up to my brother sitting in my bed, telling me that everything will be okay and to go back to sleep. The next day, my parents came to visit and see how I was doing. I asked why my brother wasn't with them. They looked at each other but didn't say anything. That night, I again woke up to my brother sitting in my bed, again telling me he knows that I can get through this, and I need to be strong and overcome this, and not let my leg injuries stop me from living life. We talked a bit, him not answering specific questions, but answering more general questions. I remember asking him why he was still wearing the same clothes from yesterday, because that was very unlike him to wear anything similar to what he had wore the day before. He didn't answer that, but when asked how he was, he said better than he thought he would be given the circumstances. He reminded me to be strong and keep living and not let anything stop me, and how much he loved me before telling me that I should get some more sleep. That next day, my parents came again to visit me in the hospital, and I again asked why my brother wasn't with them, and they again looked at each other. And it was only after I said that I would like my family to visit together and not at different times, and would like brother to visit during the day when we can talk more, instead of at night, that my dad asked what I meant. And I told him Andy had been coming at night to visit. My mom broke down and left the room. My dad then told me that it was impossible because Andy died in that accident instantly. I didn't believe it and argued with him and ended up having to be sedated. That night, I had no visit. And the next day, my parents brought a newspaper article about the incident. Years later, my fiancée had an experience, and having never seen a photo of my brother, she described him to a T and what he was wearing. That's a story for another time, but it was nice knowing that my brother is still around and looking out for me and those that I love. Since people asked me on my last post, I got permission from my fiancé to share this. Something to note before getting into what happened: my brother died when I was 13, and we were both in a car accident. My fiancé had never met my brother, never seen photos of him before this. My fiancé is bipolar, extreme highs and extreme lows. We had been dating for 4 months at the time and just moved in together. I didn't know at the time, but she had gone off her meds. This all happened while I was at work, and she told me about it later. She went out for a walk to get some air because she was feeling really claustrophobic, the start of a manic depressive episode. It got to the point she thought dying would be the best option, and standing at the corner, she thought the best idea would be just to walk into traffic. As she took a step off the curb, someone grabbed her and pulled her back and turned her around into a hug, arms wrapped around her, telling her that she doesn't truly want to do this, that everything will be okay, that she is stronger than she realizes, and it isn't her time. Told her to just breathe nice and slow deep breaths. She looked up at him and said thanks, turned around to wipe her eyes, and when she turned back, the person was gone. She told me about this when I got off work, and she wanted to put up a post online to see if she could find the guy to say a proper thank you for his help in saving her. It was when she started saying what he told her and describing him that my heart started beating fast. I knew who helped her. She described him as being 17 to 18, athletic, slightly taller than her, dark brown shaggy hair, big freckle and birthmark under his eye, with a blue shirt that said JS, Jinx, in yellow letters. It brought me back to the visit I got in the hospital, the shirt my brother wore the day of the incident, and when I saw him by my hospital bed. I told her that I know who helped her, and I can't explain it. I told her it was my brother, and she said it was impossible. It was a real person. She got mad at me for suggesting it, because she never believed in ghosts or spirits or anything like that. Very skeptical. I asked her to please trust me, and that night we drove to my parents' house, and I went into the basement and found a picture of my brother, and asked if that was who helped her, and her face went pale, and she kept asking how it was possible. I had no idea what to say because I didn't know either, but I told her how he came to me in my time of need, and it looks like that he came to her in hers. It's still crazy to think about, and I definitely cannot explain it. When I was 6 years old, my family bought our first black lab. We named her Magic, and we were inseparable. When I was 18, she passed away from a heart tumor. I was absolutely devastated, and I had a really hard time getting to sleep afterwards because she always slept in my bed with me. A year later, we got another black lab, and then this weird phenomenon started happening. It should be noted that the new lab refused to sleep in my room. He didn't even really like going in it at all. He'd always look instantly at spots and then quickly leave. I'd bring him on my bed to try to get him to sleep in my room. He'd jump off right away and cry to be left out. I sleep with my door closed, so I know it wasn't him coming in later. One night, I was tossing and turning, and all of a sudden it felt as if someone had jumped on the bottom of my bed. It freaked me out. Then, just like she would always do when she was alive, it felt like 4 paws were moving in a circle, trying to find that sweet spot, before the covers would just gently press down at my feet. This happened every night for weeks. I sort of felt like I was going insane, but one night it was really annoying me because it woke me up. So I said out loud, "Magic, go bug Mom." I was half joking to myself because I didn't actually fully believe it was her. But the next morning over breakfast, my mom looks at me and says, "The strangest thing happened to me last night." I swear it felt like Magic jumped on my bed, found a comfy spot and laid down. I had never told my mom that I thought Magic was jumping on my bed every night because I thought I was insane, but my mouth dropped when she said this. I told her how it was happening to me and that I had sent Magic to bother her that night. We cried because we didn't want Magic to think we replaced her. Later that week, it just stopped all of a sudden, and I told my mom I hadn't felt Magic jump on my bed the last few days. My mom told me that when I wasn't home, she went up to my room and told Magic that we loved her, and we will never forget her, and she could never be replaced, and it's okay for her to rest now. Ever since then, my new Labrador has slept in my room every night. I like to think Magic gave him permission. My mom and I still tell people this story. We have no explanation for it. We like to believe she came back to spend just a little bit more time with us and show the new pup how to be the goodest boy. When I was 15, Paranormal Activity came out. My friend and I decided to try the Ouija board. We spoke to this guy named Frank, and I remember he used to say really screwed up things like, "My mom is standing behind you and she doesn't like you. I'll overdose on pills." Just crazy and dark stuff. But my friend and I both thought that we were screwing with each other, trying to freak each other out. A few weeks later, I was sleeping in bed. I had a shelf above my bed head that had my grad teddy from primary school sitting on top. That teddy has sat there for years without being moved. And there was a dresser with a mirror at the end of my bed. I woke up to the teddy falling on top of my head, and when I would wake, I would be looking directly into my mirror. There, I saw a girl brushing her hair in front of my dresser. I rubbed my eyes numerously, and instead of her disappearing, she became more clear. But the more I stared, it was like I was looking at myself when I was even younger, like 6 or 7 years old. She had thick, auburn hair, but was wearing a very old-style type of gown. Soon, I realized it wasn't. I hid under the covers, and after checking numerous times to see if she was gone, she finally disappeared. This fully freaked me out. Anyway, we stopped doing the board and did other things normal teenagers do. I never told anyone about what I saw, bar a few friends, but put it down that I was just seeing things and was still dreaming. Fast forward 11 years. I'm now 26. I picked up my sister and was driving her home, and she randomly starts talking about when my friend and I played the board. And she's like, "Jose and I swear you brought something into the house." I shrug and I'm like, "Why do you think that?" And she says, "We used to wake up seeing a girl brushing her hair in front of us." I slammed on the brakes, and I was like, "What the fuck?" And she's just like, "Yeah, didn't say or do anything, just brushed her hair." And then I fessed up that I saw her too, but I thought I was dreaming. Anyway, neither of us have seen her for many years, which I consider lucky because I don't want anything in the house. But I must admit, it does still freak me out, and I really don't want to see her again. The moral of the story is, don't mess with a Ouija board. It's legit. It's messed up, and if my sisters and I all saw the same ghost, you may invite something in that you'd never want in your house. I've been told this by several different people. I believe it for that reason and a few others. This is the story. When my grandma left my abusive grandpa, many years before I was born, she moved herself and two of her three daughters, my mom and aunt, into a new house. My aunt met a guy and they started dating. He was what you'd call a greaser, hot rod driving, leather jacket wearing, greased back hair having dude. This would have been the early 70s. Most nights, he would park down the street and walk to her bedroom window, tap on it, and she would let him in through it. Her bedroom was at the back of the house, and the driveway was gravel, and it went past my mom's bedroom. My mom told me that every time he did it, she would hear his boots crunching in the gravel as he walked by. They would do whatever they did, and he'd climb back out the window and leave. Somehow, she eventually met who would become my uncle, and they're still married, and she broke things off with the guy. He didn't take it well. One night, he stopped by and tapped on the window. She let him in, and they talked for over an hour, and then he left. The phone rang in the living room, and she went out to answer it. Her friend was on the other end sobbing. She told my aunt that he had killed himself. He drove around in his hot rod with a buddy drinking liquor and shooting mailboxes. They pulled into a convenience store parking lot, and he shot himself in the face, killing himself. My aunt said that was impossible, as he had just left her house. She looked up and saw him standing outside, staring at her through the living room window, with blood all over his face. She screamed, woke up everyone in the house, and he disappeared. My aunt told them that night what had gone on. That was the only time she ever spoke about it. I've asked her a couple times to tell me, and she wouldn't. My grandma and mom eventually told me about it years later at different times. From then on, my mom would hear his boots crunching in the gravel every night, and my aunt would hear him tap on the window. It got so bad for my aunt that she begged my mom to switch rooms. They did, and my mom started hearing the tapping. Also, my grandma told me they'd always find his brand of cigarette butts in ashtrays, and only he smoked them. A few other things happened in that house before they moved, like my grandma woke up one morning an inch from the ceiling. When she screamed, the bed fell back to the floor. Back in 2008 or so, I happened to deliver a pizza to that house. I asked the woman if anything strange went on there, and she froze. She said the back room window got tapped on all the time, as well as knocking on the side door. Even though the driveway was paved, she heard what sounded like boots on it all the time. Her husband worked nights, so he didn't believe her or the kids. But she said, almost every night, something happened there. Hoath is a little village near Canterbury and Surrey, out on the old marshes that were once the Wantsum Channel. A few years ago, in 2014, my landscaping company were called to a job in a beautiful house there. The house was a converted barn and had been bought by the new owners who wanted some work to be done there before moving in, as is often the case. So the first step was to visit the property and take a look to come up with a price for the job. There was a great deal of land surrounding the property with extensive gardens that had fallen into a state of disrepair. After visiting the property, I returned, saying that the place gave me the creeps, and that although it was empty and isolated, several hundred yards from the next dwelling, it felt like I was being watched. Obviously, everyone laughed at me. I priced the job, which was a big one and would need us to be on site for about 5 days, and then I forgot about the whole thing. As it turned out, we were given the contract for the garden clearance and various tree works, and we booked in for a few weeks' time. When we arrived on site, there was a crew of builders there already, who were working inside the house and living there for a couple of weeks while they carried out the renovations. When we arrived, we said our hellos, and John asked what they thought of the house. The reply was, "It's a lovely place, but it's haunted to hell." We laughed and asked why they thought that, and they told us that all night they could hear banging coming from the empty rooms. Their tools were being moved around. They heard whispering, and one had even received a phone call from a distant voice that couldn't be understood, from the phone number 000-000-0000. He showed us the call record to prove it on his mobile phone. Interested, but still not entirely convinced, we got on with our work. Joe told us that the back courtyard gave him the willies, but apart from that, day one was uneventful. On day two, it was quiet in the morning. Then in the afternoon, I went inside for a coffee. While I was there was knocking sounds coming from one of the back rooms. Nobody was in there, but it could well have been someone in one of the garden areas knocking against the wooden walls from outside while doing some job or another. But then there was a sound like wallpaper being unrolled, or a poster falling off the wall, something like that. It came from the hall. Then out of the hall, a shadow shot through the kitchen and out of the front door. I was alone in the house at the time, and after looking at every angle, the only way the shadow could have been cast was by the kitchen lights in the middle of the room. But there was nothing to cast it. It was starting to become a believer. On day 3, Paul, one of the builders, was having an argument with somebody on the phone. When he hung up, he said, "I can't believe that. The driver from the skip company says he won't come up here to pick up the skip unless we can promise there's someone on site to meet him, because he reckons he saw something here when he dropped the skip off before we got here, and it's definitely haunted." When he did arrive, he said that when he dropped the skip off the first time, he knew the place was empty, but he saw someone moving around in there. And while he was unloading the skip, the radio in his lorry came on loud with a loud of static. Day 4 was quiet apart from the knocking and banging, which we'd all gotten used to by then, even though it was louder than before, and definitely not one of us messing about. On day 5, a guy turned up to put in a new TV aerial, and that involved some wiring being fitted in the back room where most of the noises came from. A few hours in, he was having a coffee with everyone else in the kitchen and said that he'd be glad when he was done because that room was creeping him out. He said that he was sure that he kept hearing someone walking around in there, but there was nobody inside the house, let alone in that room. The final thing that happened while we were working there was that another contractor turned up to do some light fittings and parked outside the house. While he was in there, his van radio came on really loud with a lot of static, just like the skip driver had said happened when he was still there before. A few weeks after we'd been there, the new owners had moved in, and John and I went over to visit them and settle up the bill one evening after work. John was curious and asked the owner if he was enjoying living there. He obviously read between the lines a bit. Maybe he'd already been asked about the place by one of the other contractors, and he responded by saying, "It's a beautiful house, but I must say, it takes on a completely different feeling at night. It's not such a nice place after it gets dark. We returned to work there a couple more times on smaller jobs, but as the clients were living there full time by then, we didn't spend much time in the actual house itself. But on one occasion, we were in the kitchen in the evening, having a cup of tea with the owner, when from the back room there was a huge crash, like a wardrobe being pushed over. The owner just put his fingers up and whispered, "Please pretend you didn't hear that. We don't want the children to be scared." We do a lot of work on repossessed houses and houses going through probate, so we visit a lot of empty properties often where the owner has recently died. And I've never, in over 10 years, been creeped out by a place like I was at this one. So this was when I was about 16. My family and I moved into a registered historical home that was 240 years old. It was dated around when our town was founded. When you first walked into the house, you felt it. It was like an ominous cloud that hung over everything. The first experience that I ever had was in the parlor that used to hold wakes in it. I was sitting at the computer. We converted the room into an office, and I kept hearing loud noises directly above me. The room above me was my bedroom. I was the only one home. I looked around to make sure the dogs were with me, and they weren't tearing anything apart. I initially ignored it, and it subsided. About an hour later, it started up again, with more violence. It sounded like someone had moved my entire wardrobe across my bedroom floor. I ran up the staircase, but by the time I got into the second landing, the sound stopped. I barged into my room, and it was completely silent, and no furniture had been moved. The second event was a lot more terrifying. It was about 3 a.m. I woke up to the sound of grown men arguing outside of my bedroom door. The catch? The only male that lived with us was my 14-year-old brother. I jumped out of my bed and flung the door open to catch it. Nothing. I got back in bed after I stupidly locked the door, as if it would stop anything. It started again. This time I went to my grandmother's and brother's separate rooms. They were both asleep and all the TVs were off. The toilet down the hall flushed itself and I ran back to my room. The third event is where we finally decided to move. My brother was taking a shower upstairs. While he showered, a clear, perfect imprint of another set of feet appeared in front of him. Small things that happen in between those events, but those are the ones that really stood out the most. I've witnessed paranormal activity since the age of 7. I'm 26 now and experience activity wherever I go. It started with my sister and a group of her friends playing with a Ouija board when we were younger. My sister and her friends were between the ages of 10 and 12, and I was just 7. My grandmother told me that because I was the youngest and the most innocent of the group, something latched to me. I have many stories to tell, but I'll tell some of the shorter stories unless you guys are interested in hearing more. My mom saw a black figure, which looked like a person crawling on all fours with dislocated joints, coming down the hallway wearing one of my Halloween masks. And when my mom turned to face it, it disappeared. She screamed my name, thinking it was me trying to scare her. When she saw that I poked my head out of the day room, it was added onto the living room to our trailer, her face lost even more color. She had me go into my room and dig out a Halloween mask that was a skull face plate with horns around the top. She said the figure was wearing it. She wanted it out of the house. On 3 separate occasions, my grandmother had woken up to a little boy wearing an early 19th century sailor suit. And when she looked closer at him, she could see that his skin was pale, and it was dark blue-black around his eyes and lips. Another time, I was playing with my dog by throwing a blanket over my head, and he would pull the blanket off. My dog starting to whimper and cry, and before I could take the blanket off to see what was wrong, I hear a deep, raspy male's voice breathe heavily in my ear and then exhale. My dog then proceeded to freak out and bark. These are the shortest of the stories that I have. The rest are long enough to make a movie or thick chapter book. If you're interested in them, I can take the time to type them all out. From 2010 to 2011, my family lived briefly in an early 1900s house in Ashland, Kentucky. The house was 3 floors, with the 3rd floor being a converted attic. My older sister's bedroom was essentially the whole 3rd floor, while my younger brother and I shared a room on the 2nd floor next to my parents. For my siblings and me, there was a definite culture shift in moving to Ashland from Nashville. We went from a more suburban area to a somewhat more remote area of northern Kentucky. We were further in Appalachia, and the people were definitely different. We noticed it first in the behaviors of our next-door neighbors. The house on our left belonged to an old hoarder named Joanne. The woman was rarely seen, but monstrous when she would confront my family and me. She didn't drive, but there was an old gray sedan filled to the brim with newspapers and trash that sat in her driveway for as long as we lived there. Her backyard was littered with ancient-looking antiques, statues, and furniture. After once finding my brother and I snooping around her yard, laughing at all the junk she had collected, she made a statement along the lines of, "Ruth should straighten you out," and motioned back towards our house. We never thought much of it until our other next-door neighbor mentioned that a previous owner of our house was a longtime friend of hers named Ruth. Ruth had died in the house years before. Hearing that was more than enough to creep the hell out of my brother and me. Inside our house, it was my sister that first started having strange experiences. She was around 17 at the time, yet almost like a young child. She could hardly stay in the house by herself. She said that her bedroom scared her, and that she felt like something was in her closet. The 3rd floor had 3 closets, and the biggest one had 2 sliding doors. My sister mentioned that many times she would think that her door was closed, look away, and then find it open without any explanation. At nighttime, there were a few times when she came downstairs knocking on my parents' door, asking for them to keep it down, only to notice that the noise wasn't coming from anyone in the house. It was muffled speaking that only my sister could hear in her room. After a few months, my sister became so uncomfortable on the 3rd floor that she moved into our 2nd floor guest room. My brother and I quickly begged to take the 3rd floor room because it meant more space. We didn't really know at the time how scared my sister was of the 3rd floor. Right away, I was definitely able to feel a tension in the room. I would often feel like I was buzzing on high alert for no reason. One way to describe the feeling would be that it was similar to how you'd feel moments after someone almost hit you with their car. Even after the moment is over, you can feel your heart race, your mind buzz, and your senses heighten. Almost daily, I would feel the tension in the room and start to get this overwhelming feeling. The sliding door closet was, for whatever reason, the center of a lot of the incidents that I witnessed. Multiple times I watched the door slide open with no one pulling or pushing it. The floor was level, and we tested the AC to see if an air vent was causing the sliding door to blow open, and we couldn't find a connection. One night, my brother had his friend over, and they were playing with Legos in the room in front of the closet. I watched as the shut door slammed open just behind them. The 3 of us sprinted downstairs screaming. And though my mom was able to console us, she told me years later that she was terrified. She fully started believing that something was in the house once she had a closet slam open in front of her. She then felt a cold rush over her shoulders and back, and then panicked and left the house. About a month after that, she moved my brother and I back into our 2nd floor bedroom, and we only used the 3rd floor as a guest room. Though it's been over 10 years, I still remember being petrified of being in that room alone, even during the day. It was a very stressful point in my childhood, and I feel like I still attach a lot of negativity and bad memories to that time. I've never had other paranormal experiences outside of this, but my experiences in Ashland, Kentucky were so strong that it is tough for me to be a skeptic. Something is truly in that house, and it could very well be a ghost named Ruth. A lot of things went down in this house, but out of all the spooky things they've happened to me here, this one just crossed my mind after 18 years. I was 14 years old, living in Orange County with my 2 sisters and my mother. We had a rough upbringing, so renting an actual house was like a dream come true for us at the time, until we realized we were living in a haunted house. I was with my mom the day that we rented. The garage was scary as hell, even in the daylight with people around. It just always gave me a clustered feeling of something being there that I couldn't see. When the garage door was shut, it was pitch black. No light at all from outside could get through that garage door. During the summer, I would wake up early. I would listen to my CDs on my radio. So every time I came in or out, I made sure my bedroom door was shut, because my mom liked to sleep in the living room on the couch right outside my bedroom. I would clean my room, the kitchen and bathroom, before I would ask my mom if I could meet my best friend at our halfway mark. This particular morning, the funky, spooky things of the house started early. As I walked out of my bedroom, shut my door, walked down the hall passing 2 bedrooms to the restroom, I noticed something from the corner of my eye in the kitchen, like a silhouette of a person that vanished. This was normal. My mom's bedroom was directly outside the bathroom doorway to the right, and it had a private bathroom which led to the garage. Well, as I was walking to the restroom, I saw a person walking into my mom's bedroom, like a woman, which I assumed was my mother since we were the only ones home. Thinking it was my mom, I was talking to her about leaving to my friends, and the bedroom door shut on my face. And I was just thinking, wow, okay, she must be in a bad mood. So I opened the door again and asked if I could go to my friends when the bathroom door started shutting. When I opened the bathroom door and said, "Mom," I realized the garage door was wide open. The garage door was heavy and did not stay open on its own ever, and it was pitch black. In that moment, I knew that it wasn't my mom, so I ran out, shut her bedroom door behind me, and started towards my bedroom, when I noticed my bedroom door was also wide open. I was standing in my room, confused, and realized my radio was off. I tried turning it on multiple times, and I saw that it was actually unplugged. I went to the living room to wake my mom up and asked if she had went to my room to unplug my radio. She said she didn't ever go into my room or touch my radio that morning because she was still sleeping. I don't even know why I had to ask if she went into the garage through her bedroom for clarification, but needless to say, it wasn't her either. She asked me to please not leave her there alone, but I did, and I still feel bad about it. Anyway, that night, I didn't want to come back home. I know, whatever it was this time, it wanted me in that garage alone. So basically, the last house we lived in was pretty creepy to say the least. Quite a few unexplained things happened there, but there was one experience that really stood out to me and will always be imprinted in my brain. My mother had gone out, so it was only me, my brother, and sister in the house. Well, so we thought. My sister was around 4 or 5 at the time. She could be pretty forgetful and forgot my mother had gone out, so casually shouted, "Mom," as in a question sort of tone. I swear to God,
I heard clear as day the perfect yes response in my mother's voice. I was pretty confused and thought maybe she got back early, but looked out the window and her car was still gone. I ran downstairs and asked my brother if he heard that. He said that he also heard it. My sister was pretty confused. She heard it as well. She was about to go looking for our mother after she heard that voice thinking it was her. I'm just glad that she didn't. Whatever that was it potentially trying to lure her somewhere? I thought I was hearing things, but after my brother and sister heard it too, I was certain that some sort of entity cloning my mother's voice was in our home. She got back like 20 minutes later, and we told her about it. She was just as confused as we were. To this day, I still question what that was. I previously posted some things that went on in my house growing up. This story that I am about to tell is the first spooky experience that I can remember as a child. I don't remember how old I was. Probably no older than 12. My younger sister and I were friends with our neighbor's granddaughter, who was often at her grandparents' house while her mom worked. We'd take turns going to each other's house. The girl we played with, I'll call her Jay, had pretty much free reign over the house while her grandma, who was a nurse, slept during the day. We weren't allowed upstairs, though. This house was like my parents' house. Jay's grandparents were the first owners. They were very good Christian people. Jay had a rough childhood and was a pathological liar. We had a lot of drama between the three of us. One day, while Grandma was sleeping, we decided to sneak upstairs. There were at least 3 bedrooms, beautifully decorated with antique furniture and decor. We decided to pick a room and pretend it was ours and play house. We even had some baby dolls to play with. After a while, I began to feel uncomfortable and like I was being watched. I met back up with Jay and my sister and told them that I didn't feel right up there. My sister felt the same way. Jay told us that when she was younger, they heard voices from upstairs. It was hard to know when she was telling the truth, though. Regardless of whether she was lying, all 3 of us felt freaked out upstairs. We decided to go downstairs and never played upstairs again. Every now and then, I'd look up at their upstairs windows from my house and just get this awful feeling of dread. I grew up believing in ghosts. My brother and I would ghost hunt my grandma's basement using a free app off our mom's phone sometimes, but nothing really happened. Granted, this can mostly be called a paranoia and fear of the dark, but basically, I lived with my grandma for a lot of my childhood due to my mom's work. Extra information. My grandma's house is 4 stories tall with a basement and an attic. My room has 2 mirrors facing each other, hanging on 2 walls of my house, and 2 more facing my bed connected to my TV stand. And at one point, I had a full body mirror facing my TV or closet. When I was younger, maybe 11 or 12, any time that I left my room, when it was dark inside the house, I would feel like something was watching me. Nothing touched me, I don't think, but I always felt a need to get away as fast as possible. The feeling started as the cliche basement fear of something in the dark. It actually ended up getting to the point where I refused to go to the basement while it was dark down there. It grew to the stairs, and even into the hallway where my room was. I refused to go to the bathroom after like midnight unless I really needed to, because I hated the feeling. I can't remember if I felt it in the attic, because I barely ever went up there already. Anywhere that wasn't lit up scared the crap out of me. I always had my room lights on since I could hardly sleep anyways. But that doesn't mean that stuff didn't still try to mess with me in my room. I hardly acknowledged it, not wanting them to do more. I would sometimes wake up with scratches on my torso or legs that resembled cat scratches at best, or it looked like a human scratched me, like I had an itch at worst. I've never owned a cat. We had 2 dogs who didn't sleep in my room. I never had anything on my bed that could scratch me in my sleep. They wouldn't be small, nor would they be painless. They would sting at least for a couple of days, and the longest I had, think it was the length of my hand, maybe longer. I had very few friends over, but after they came to stay the night, and it would be a normal light when they would go home, we would end up talking about the paranormal. They would offhandedly mention how, as the night got deeper, the house would feel a bit unsettling, specifically my room, where we mainly stayed all night. I would be a bit surprised as I wouldn't notice it, being used to the feeling, but we moved on. One friend mentioned seeing a little girl in my full body mirror once. Said it didn't seem harmful, more like mocking me and finding it funny. I refused to acknowledge it so it would get bored. Another friend swore they heard a little kid voice on a video call when I had to leave for a second. Said friend didn't know about what the other friend saw. People said they noticed it a couple more times, but we moved on from it. Other mentions. Sometimes my bedroom door would open and then seem like it was being attempted to be closed, but someone wasn't pushing it strong enough. My door wasn't hard to close, nor could it open that easy. It stopped a little after I didn't acknowledge it. The floors are kind of creaky when you step on them, so you can sometimes hear when someone's walking. I swear, I heard creaky noises almost like footprints right next to my room in the kitchen. The kitchen and my room are right next to each other, just separated by a sheet wall, when no one else was on the floor. Yes, I would check. Sometimes in my room, I would feel something hovering over my blankets, but it went away in minutes. But it did scare me enough to keep my body in the blanket. I don't know if anyone else in the house felt this, and I don't intend to ask. Since I've gotten older, I'm 19 now, the feeling slowly went away, starting around 17-ish. I've cleansed my room multiple times, and took out the full body mirror. I don't get scratches in my sleep anymore, and I barely have the feeling of something watching me. I can go into the basement at night now, but I have to turn the lights on where I go to feel fine. Was this just me feeding into little kid ghost beliefs? Or was it something real? When I was a kid, I'd go to sleep with the radio on. One night, I heard a man singing along. I crept out of my room and saw a man standing on our entryway. I went and got my parents. My dad got a gun and checked all the locks and windows, all secure. He came back and asked me to describe the man. I did, and the color drained from his face, and he looked at my mom and went into their room to get something. It was a picture. He asked if that was the man that I saw. I confirmed that it was. The picture was of his father, who died 8 years before my birth, so I'd never met him, and we didn't have any pictures of him displayed. It was in a box in their closet that child me wouldn't have any reason or ability to get to. As a kid, I believed in ghosts. As an adult, ghosts don't make total sense to me. But I remember this night pretty vividly. So while adult me is kind of a skeptic, how would kid me have known what a grandfather I'd never met looked like, including describing the clothing that he wore? In the picture, it wasn't this outfit, but it was an outfit that he did have and my dad remembered it. Adult skeptic me comes up with explanations. Maybe I really did see the picture, and it was stored somewhere in my brain, and my subconscious/semi-awake mind just pulled it to the surface. Maybe my dad had described this outfit to me. The brain has a large capacity. We know much more than we think we do. But again, I never knew the guy, and I gave a lot of detail. And the way that I described him acting, well, that's not something that I'd have known, because I'd never experienced the way that he acted. I'll tell you what, though, My dad sure was creeped out. I saw death again last night. The entity, not the occurrence. Yesterday, I was talking with an old friend of mine. She just witnessed her dad have a really bad heart attack. As far as I know, he's still alive, but she hasn't responded to any of my texts. That being said, I had a strange dream last night. I was laying on my couch watching TV when this small being drenched in black mist floated past me and turned into a doorway. I could faintly make out its charred skull. It was cloaked, and the mist that followed was a lot like black smoke disappearing behind it as it glided through the air. It kind of reminded me of the Dementors from Harry Potter. I quickly grabbed my phone and opened the camera to video it, but was stunned when I looked back up to find it staring at me. The skull was hard to see, but I could make out its fingers hanging from its dark cloak. Its face was obviously a skull, but it was so black. It was hard to find the lines, but its dark eye holes, nose, and loosely closed mouth were the darkest areas I could see, other than its cloak anyway. I fell back onto the couch looking at it from the corner of my eye. I wasn't sure if it was coming closer to me or staying stagnant from the bright TV shining at me. But I spoke, telling it that it had to leave, and to leave me and my family alone. That's when I woke up in sleep paralysis in my bed. The room was dark, but I finally got the strength to turn the lamp on. In the living room, there was nothing out of the ordinary. The light was dimmed and the TV was shut off just like it was supposed to be. The only big difference I noticed was my living room seemed larger in the dream, and there was no doorway behind the TV. It was just a wall. And death, at least I'm assuming that's what entity it was smaller than the last few times I've seen it. The first was the day my grandmother passed away, only a few hours before I found her in her bed. That time I was outside, and it wasn't a dream. The second was a few days before I had to put one of my pets down. This was more like a sleep paralysis experience. I called my parents to see if they were all right, and nothing out of the ordinary there. However, I'm still very concerned for my old friend. I hope everything's all right. Last time she spoke to me was yesterday. She was going to see her dad in the hospital, but she hasn't answered me since. Has anyone else ever seen death before? To begin with, I've lost both my parents and miss them dearly. We were a close family, and there's not a day that goes by without me thinking of them. This year on my birthday, I was watching Ghostbusters Afterlife by myself in the evening after the party had ended and my friends had left. The part where the spirit of Aegon plays chess with his granddaughter came on, where chess pieces are moving by themselves, and half-jokingly I said out loud, "How come you can't do something cool like that, Mom and Dad?" No sooner than I said that, a single balloon came unattached from where it was taped on the wall and fell to the ground. Not only that, but it was a green one, my favorite color since I was a kid. I guess my folks showed me. This story is 100% true and not fiction. It might not be scary, but it's very odd. Backstory. My grandma's fiance passed away from cancer when I was less than a year old. I'll call him Peter Smith in this story. He was buried the province over from us. A few years ago, My mom, myself, and my grandma were going to visit his grave on his birthday, or death anniversary. It was one of the two, I can't remember right now. The morning of, my grandma was getting ready for us to go pick her up. She got a phone call and answered it. It was a doctor saying my grandma was the first contact for this matter, and that Peter's test results were in. She has a brother named Peter as well, so she asked, "My brother?" The doctor responded, "No, Peter Smithson." My grandma was shocked and said that he died years ago. The doctor said there must have been a mix-up and hung up. We went on the road trip, and my grandma was still in shock the whole time. Now, any other day of the year, this could have been written off, but on his death anniversary/birthday, it isn't. Plus, his real name is not common, so I don't know. This is one of the ghost stories that I usually tell. The tales that I am about to recount are both from my perspective, having occurred around 2004 to 2007 or so. There are two individual experiences that happened in this particular home, one alongside my sister, and then one I experienced perhaps 2 years later alone. I don't remember the exact age of the home, but it was around 200 years old, built in the 1800s in New Hampshire. It's worth noting we only lived in that house between the years that I referenced. I was about 12 or 13 when the events took place. The first experience took place at night. My sister and I were outside the front door of her downstairs apartment. We had been packing some of her items into her car and stopped for a quick breather. Suddenly, we heard a sound from inside. She had a lighthouse magnet on the fridge that, when physically pressed, made the sound of a foghorn. Well, we looked at each other dumbfounded as the magnet foghorn played. We waited a minute, and it went off again. It continued to intermittently play, and eventually, we were so spooked we drove to our dad's house late that night. We've had that magnet to this day, and not once has it reproduced this behavior. 2 years or so later, I was upstairs in the top floor bedroom of the house, alone in my room at night and laying in bed, very much awake. The only other person was my mother downstairs asleep in her room. My room had a walk-in closet, and inside the closet was part of the chimney and the door to a crawl space on the roof. The doors to the closet were closed. I was recounting the day when I heard a noise that caught my attention. I figured it was a cat and dismissed it from my mind. Eventually, I heard the sound become louder, and in time started to focus on it. It was at this point that I thought I heard a voice, and as it got louder, it seemed to be coming from the closet. By this point, I believed I was hallucinating, so I sat up in bed to ideally clear my head. I hadn't dozed off, but figured maybe I had been falling asleep. I was attempting to rationalize the situation. As I sat up, I heard the voice a moment later, the loudest it had been, uttering the same word. I heard whispered, already half a dozen times before, "Burn." Long, drawn out, and a tired hiss emanating from behind the closet doors. I was stunned and scared beyond belief. I heard it one more time and darted out the door to the staircase going downstairs. To this day, I have always believed that house to be haunted. Part of me thinks the noise that I heard at night was perhaps an animal that had snuck into the attic, but I will never know for sure. I haven't had any other experiences since. Thank you for reading. One night last year, I went to bed just like any normal night. The only light illuminating my room was the TV. I was having a hard time sleeping, which wasn't uncommon, so I turned off the TV like I always did in the hopes that complete darkness would help me drift off to sleep. Laying there with my eyes closed, I felt wide awake still. Here's the thing. I have no idea how long I laid there, for thinking of absolutely nothing but being awake. No sense of time. No emotions being felt. Now, I don't know about y'all, but I like to imagine movies or stories or think about my next day to drift off to sleep. I let my mind begin dreaming before I'm actually asleep. But tonight, I had no thoughts. I can't describe the feeling well, but it was like I was standing in the darkness of my mind. No feelings or emotions, or sense of anything except for existence. Standing there, something began to form. It was like I was looking down this black hallway. At the end of the hallway, I saw this creature bent over. It had human-like features to begin with. And as I stood there staring at it for a while, it morphed into this tall, lengthy creature with long claw-like hands. Holding something in its hands, still hunched over, I could see it was eating something, but I couldn't tell what it was. Suddenly, it stood up and looked directly at me and charged at me with claws up. Its face white and oval-shaped, with a pointy nose and mouth wide open, with a row of perfectly aligned, pointed teeth. It rushed at me with incredible speed down this hall. I had nowhere to go, but even if I did, whatever consciousness I had couldn't look away from the rushing red eyes that looked excited to begin gnawing at me next. But as soon as it got in my face, I smacked it as hard as I could. It disappeared out of my view for a moment and popped back up. This time, just ahead, floating. The white face and red eyes smiling with a pointed, toothy grin just floated around my head, circling. I smiled back at the thought of me just smacking it a moment ago. I told it couldn't touch me. I just hit it, and it can't touch me. The disembodied head just floated around me, not saying a word, and smiled. This went on for what felt like hours. No talking, just this head floating around me and staring at me with its smile. While this happened, I thought to myself, is this sleep paralysis? I've always heard you can't move during sleep paralysis. I mean, paralysis is in the name, right? So I try to move. First my toes, then my leg. Realizing I can move and being aware my eyes are closed, and I'm quite honestly too afraid to open them and see that face in front of me outside my mind. I could feel its physical pressure outside of my body, and the fear of it making another move at me made me keep my eyes shut and avoid moving more than I already did. I continued to smile back and try to bluff the fear I was holding hidden from the entity in front of me. I'm not sure when, but the face eventually faded away, just floated away till it was gone with no words said, but a lingering feeling that it may return should it choose to. I opened my eyes slowly, and I turned the TV on for light, and to honestly put a cartoon on to lighten my mood. Looking at my phone, it was 1 a.m., and I had probably closed my eyes sometime around 10 p.m. I ended up staying up a few more hours after that, talking to my now girlfriend. It never happened again, but it still gives me weird vibes when I think about it. Not quite goosebumps, more like a tense defensive situation that engulfs my body and senses. In 2013, I was a freshman in college. There are always university stories with haunted dorms, rooms, or basements. So I never thought anything of it when I heard that our dorm, Rogers Hall, was very haunted. Within the first 3 weeks, 5 girls attempted to unalive themselves by jumping off the building. Thankfully, they were all unsuccessful, but it for sure rocked us and made us start to believe that there may be an angry presence hanging around. One early morning, my roommate and I were asleep, and we always left the TV on, and we were in bunk beds. This is kind of important to the story, because normally my roommate couldn't get out of bed without waking me up. When I woke up, I didn't have my glasses on, but I could see a girl standing in front of our TV. She had medium brown hair, was wearing a gray sweatshirt and some jeans, and she looked like she was chewing on her sleeve. I immediately thought it was my roommate and rolled over to turn on my desk lamp and grab my glasses to ask her why she was up so early. When I flipped on the light and grabbed my glasses, she was gone, and I thought maybe my roommate went to the bathroom. So I got out of bed and looked up at her bed, and she was still sleeping. I shook her awake and asked her how she got up there so quickly, and she had no idea what I was talking about. The same day, just within a few hours, our friend that lived down the hall went to the communal bathroom and was washing her face. The door to the bathroom was very heavy and scraped the floor when you opened it. She said she heard someone open the bathroom door, and she saw someone walk behind her. She didn't think anything of it because it was our floor's bathroom, and girls were all waking up to get ready for classes. On one side of the bathroom there were toilets, and on the other side of the bathroom there were showers, but there were sinks and mirrors in the middle for both sides. Our friend was on the side of the showers. She said she saw the girl walk into the shower. As she was washing her face, she never heard the shower turn on, and she called over to her asking if everything was okay. She even walked over to see if the girl needed help, but there was no one there. Nothing ever happened again to either of us that year, but it still creeps me out. When my parents divorced, we moved to my grandmother's house. It was an old farmhouse, 2 stories with 4 bedrooms and a bathroom upstairs in a horseshoe shape, with the stairs where the horseshoe is going open. Going downstairs, the living room is on the right, and the dining room on the left that leads into the kitchen. My grandmother's room was off of the kitchen. Without a doubt, the landing at the top of the stairs. The stairs themselves, the living room, and the dining room had a presence. It felt mean. It felt like someone bad was watching, just waiting to harm you. It was common knowledge in the family that the house was haunted. When my aunt and uncle visited, he slept with a gun under his pillow. Not that it would help, but at least he felt comfortable. My great-grandmother was mean in life, and apparently mean in death, since most people believed that the spirit is hers. My mom's brother died when he was about 5, and at times you could hear him playing on the stairs, bumping down like kids do. I would race downstairs, through the dining room and into the safety of the lightness of the kitchen. I hated to be alone upstairs, and slept with the hall light on, until we moved when I was 14. When my sister was young, probably about 5 or 6, we had just moved into a new house as a family. My sister was always good about sleeping by herself at night, which was ironic given how I myself was not. But regardless, she gave our parents relatively little trouble sleeping by herself ever. Except one night, when she had a particularly rough night and went downstairs to ask my mom to sleep with her. Because as little kids tend to do, she got scared. Mom goes upstairs with her and lies down. My sister falls asleep, but my mom is struggling to fall asleep. That is, until Dad gets in bed behind her, holding them both. This helps Mom fall asleep, and they all pass out together. Mom wakes up. Dad isn't in bed with them anymore. That's fairly typical. My dad gets up super early to go to work most mornings, and lets my mom sleep in. So she thinks nothing of it until he gets home. She asks him when he came upstairs to sleep with them last night, as he was asleep when my sister first asked Mom to come to bed with her. Dad replies that he never left their bed. He slept by himself downstairs all night. What in the world got in bed with my mom? This just happened earlier this morning. I have sleep issues, so I'm always up long before daylight. I'm also the only one in the house up this early, besides a few of the dogs and cats. Around 4:30 this morning, I woke up and shuffled into the kitchen to make my coffee as usual. I can't drink hot coffee, so I make mine in the blender. I have this thing that every time I start the blender, I feel like someone's behind me. I always look and no one's ever been there, but still. My kitchen is at the back of the big old house, so when I'm standing at the blender, the laundry room with a half bath is to my left. Directly behind me is the doorway into the dining room. My bedroom door is on the right dining room wall. And in back there, there's another door into the living room, which is locked at night. So, I'm in the kitchen. One of my dogs, Teddy, and one of my cats, Phoenix, are sitting on a chair next to me. I'm doing my thing and I start the blender. A couple seconds later, Teddy growls, looking into the dining room. Phoenix is looking in the same direction, and I immediately get the someone's behind me feeling. I turn the blender off and look behind me, expecting nothing as usual, and see what looked like my husband going back into the bedroom. My bedroom doesn't have a door, so there's a curtain over it. I saw him go through the door, just a quick glimpse, really. And when he threw the curtain back, one of my other cats, Thomas, attacked it. I stopped the blender, thinking, what is he doing up? At first, I thought he must have gone to the bathroom. We have an upstairs bathroom, but he'd have to unlock the door and walk upstairs, which he wouldn't do. And to get to the downstairs bathroom, he would have quite literally have to squeeze past me to get to the door, and he hadn't. Neither of my kids had come in, and the house is silent. I walked into the bedroom, pretty much right behind him. My husband is sound asleep, and so are the other dogs. No one there but me. But Teddy and Phoenix saw him, and I know I did. So who the hell went into my bedroom? And where the hell did they go? My best friend passed away in 2014. I was in school at the time, so I was distraught and didn't know how I would carry on living. To this day, even being married with kids, I'm still feeling like my life is just an epilogue. Like my life was paused that day that I found out that he died. Fair to say, I was gutted. Anyways, I got really into my PC gaming, and I would play Counter-Strike with my other friends that I met in college. And it's funny because thinking back on it, I never felt alone when it was just me and when my friends were all busy. One night, I dreamt about him. He met me at the Spear Pillar, a location from a Pokemon game that we both loved, and he hugged me, and it was as if his young self had matured while being 2 to 3 years on the other side. I felt his stubble against my cheek. It was very surreal. Further on, he told me that I needed to stop worrying and that he's always with me, be it on the bus, chilling at home, or in college. He said he's always there. Then he said something that quite frankly blew my mind. He mentioned how it's nice of me to keep the spot at the end of the bed clear for him to sit down on, as it's his favorite spot every night. He loves watching me play CSGO, especially with my mates. The conversations made him laugh. He said no matter where I am, he'll find me and keep me company. It's crazy, because subconsciously, I would always clear my bed, and bearing in mind my room wasn't always the tidiest. As an adult, I've got better at being tidy. I'm so glad to have met him, and even when I'm away on deployment, or even putting my kids to bed, I still feel him around, and it makes me feel very happy and very nostalgic. In 2017, I got a tattoo dedicated to him too. It was my first ever tattoo. I just miss my friend. When I was in university, I lived in an older house that was built beside a church. The house was over 100 years old, but unsure of its actual age. I lived in the basement and had a few housemates. We didn't know it at the time, but it was built on a cemetery. That was discovered shortly after I moved out. Weird things would happen in the house, but I'm still not sure if it was haunted or just purely coincidental. I would hear footsteps above my room late at night, and when I would ask the next day who was in the kitchen at 2 a.m., my housemates would say that they never came downstairs at all. My one housemate had a cat, and the one day we were in the kitchen, the back door opened by itself and the cat walked in. I did see what I believe was a shadow figure in that house. I had a bookshelf beside my bed and had a Buddha statue on one of the top shelves. In the middle of the night, there was a huge bang. When I woke up, I saw a black figure jump from the bookshelf to the floor and run out of the room. The shelf with the Buddha figure had fallen off the bookshelf, and the Buddha had smashed to pieces on the floor. I thought at first maybe it was my housemate's cat that somehow knocked the shelf off. But the next morning, when I told my housemate about what had happened, they said the cat had been locked in their room with them all night. Shortly after that, I moved out. The house was owned by the church, and there was a parking lot in the backyard. The church was adding an addition, and had started construction and digging up the parking lot behind the house. During the construction, human remains were found, which obviously halted the construction until it was determined why the remains were there. It was found that before the house existed, a small cemetery had been on that land. At least 30 skeletons were found, and not sure if they were able to determine the identities or why they were buried there. For some reason, when the house was built, it was decided to build on top of the cemetery, and the records of the cemetery's existence was either lost or forgotten over time. Not sure if other housemates had experiences there. It was a creepy house, and I remember them mentioning hearing things at night and not liking to stay there alone. Like I said, I'm unsure if it was haunted, but weird things definitely did happen there. There was this one time, several years ago, my identical twin and I were about 11 or 12 years old, and we had one of our first real creepy experiences together. I didn't think much of it until today when we both talked about it, because it was just so creepy to us. We are almost 21 years old today, so my twin and I were born and raised in a house built in the mid-1800s, and we actually still live there now. It used to be a mini hospital, and our garage actually used to be an old schoolhouse in the early 1900s. It even still has a furnace in the classroom, and the teacher's office and living area. Usually you would think a house built that long ago and with its history would be haunted. But honestly, we never really got that vibe from it. It felt constantly creepy, but nothing obviously paranormal happened until this story. I think as kids, we wanted to think the house was haunted because it just felt like it should be. It has an upstairs, an extremely creepy unfinished basement with a root cellar, tons of little cubbies, and little doors leading to Coraline-like crawl spaces. But despite that, it actually wasn't too bad. We just loved to creep ourselves out. Anyway, we were in the dining room, and if you can imagine it, right off the dining room was the kitchen. And from the dining room to the kitchen, you can see the laundry room door in the kitchen. And the laundry room door also led to the basement. The door from the dining room into the kitchen was open, but the laundry room door was closed, and we could see that from where we were sitting at the dining room table. And at that moment, we were drawing and doing homework, and our parents weren't home. I remember Human by Christina Perri was playing. I still can't listen to it to this day, from the living room TV. We hadn't known until we talked about it just recently, but we had both been just kind of looking at the door a lot. We felt like we couldn't keep our eyes off of it for too long. And this was strange because we've never really been scared of that door during the day. And this was during the day, especially when it was closed, because back then it wasn't creepy. We were only scared of it at night. But we had both been eyeballing the door, but hadn't said anything to each other or noticed the other one doing the same. And I remember thinking, wouldn't it be creepy if I looked up and the door was open? So I looked up, and the door was open. That particular door makes a lot of noise when it opens too, and we heard absolutely nothing, but it was wide open. My twin had also apparently looked up from his drawing and saw it too. We both didn't say anything or look at each other, didn't skip a single beat, and ran outside. I remember feeling this horrible, terrifying feeling for the first time, like a tingling in my scalp and heart, all throughout my arms. It felt even scarier that it wasn't just me. My twin saw it too. I was scared to death, and we didn't stop running until we were a little ways down the road away from the house. We even left the front door open. And what happened may seem kind of silly to someone else, but my twin and I have always had this really strange connection. We don't have to even speak to each other, and we just know what the other one is thinking and feeling. And that moment really felt significant, because who gets scared of an open door? I almost feel like it was some kind of sixth sense, or it might just be that we both felt the same thing, whatever it was. And it seemed like every significantly creepy experience we had in that house was when we were both together. I might add, no one opened the door, no one came home, and there was no wind. It really wasn't possible in a house with no steady air moving. I don't know. I felt like this story was worth telling, and maybe someone has a similar story or something to say about it. So for context, the town I used to live in has frequently been referred to as the most haunted town in Australia, and I used to work in a bar on the town's main street, with parts of the building being over 100 years old. This bar, according to the stories, had 3 ghosts that lived in it, mostly in the old upstairs area that was no longer used as a public space and just as storage. None of these ghosts were at all malicious, but staff staying back late to close, such as myself, would frequently have sightings and encounters. That being said, the only time I was ever remotely unsettled by an encounter was with that of a young boy who, according to the stories, had died in a fire. In this upstairs storage area, there was an old photograph of this boy, and to put it simply, he moves in the photo. Now, he never moves while someone is watching, but you would look at the photo, look away for a second, and when you look back, the boy would be in a completely different position. I saw this happen on several occasions, and the only reason I know it wasn't a trick, or just me going crazy, is due to several of the bar staff, both past and present, having confirmed seeing the same thing. I don't think it's anything bad, just a little boy playing around, but it used to weird me the hell out. Since this is a special video with campfire sounds in the background, I wanted to make it a little bit shorter, just to see what you guys felt about the fire on the screen and the fire cracking sounds in the background. If you like them, please leave a comment and let me know what you think about the new background sounds. Don't worry, it's not replacing the rain. I just wanted to put this in here to see if people liked it and maybe add these videos in there every once in a while as well. Also, before we get to the extra fire crackling at the end of this video, I want to thank all of our channel members. So thank you so much to Taryn, Brittany Big Borrow, Said I Would, Inner Scare Wifey, Ruby Wilson, Vanita Tillman, Jennifer Moyer, Sonic the Hedgehog, Chili, Cutie Patootie, Cappy Karma, Pamela Curran, Christy Goodall, Paul Reese, Via Maj K0101, and Honey Pond. I appreciate you guys so much for being a member. It really means a lot to me. And to everyone, have an excellent rest of your night and enjoy the extra fire sounds at the end of this video. Good night, everybody.